Welcome back, time travelers. You've spent a lot of time in the 19th century lately, and if there's one thing you've learned through our studies of both Romanticism and Transcendentalism, it's that the 19th century was a time of change. But how does change begin? What prompts somebody to say, hey, maybe the old way isn't working for everyone and it's time for a new perspective? It could be as simple as wondering if cayenne pepper would taste good in chocolate chip cookies, or it could be as complex and impactful as suggesting to an established system that they're treating certain groups of people unjustly and something needs to change. But no matter how big or small, change begins with trailblazers who are willing to take a chance. People who dare to think outside the box and share their ideas. People who are willing to question social norms and challenge conventional wisdom. This week, you're going to learn about two of those trailblazers, Amos Bronson Alcott and Margaret Fuller. Alcott and Fuller were Transcendentalists, and they were innovative thinkers whose ideas sparked change and whose legacies continue to inspire us. In today's video, we'll learn how Amos Bronson Alcott made Transcendentalism a way of life and worked to reform the way children were educated. And we'll talk about how Margaret Fuller's bold social critiques fueled the women's rights movement even long after her death. Finally, we'll review the lesson agenda so that you'll be prepared to travel back to the 19th century one more time before we bring this unit to a close. Get ready to be inspired as we unravel the fascinating stories and powerful writings of Alcott and Fuller, two 19th century trailblazers. Amos Bronson Alcott was born in Connecticut in 1799. He was one of 8 children in a family of farmers. At age 13, during some difficult financial times, Alcott had to quit school and help his family. However, he continued to read and study on his own, and he developed some ideas about education. Those ideas led Alcott to establish Boston's Temple School in 1834. There, he implemented a student-centered methodology that emphasized critical thinking, creativity, and self-expression. There was a lot of discussion and experience-based learning, and because he was opposed to the practice of inflicting physical pain on students, there was no corporal punishment. Unfortunately, Alcott's progressive methods didn't catch on, and he had to close the school. However, there was a similar school near London called the Alcott House, modeled after these same ideas, and it was doing pretty well. The Alcott House School was part of a utopian community. While visiting this community, Alcott met with fellow Transcendentalist Charles Lane, and together they made plans for an experimental community in America. They purchased a farm in Massachusetts and created a utopian society called Fruitlands. Wanting to be self-reliant, they didn't buy goods from outside the community. Instead, they grew their own food and stuck to a plant-based diet. They made their own clothes out of wool that they sheared from their sheep. Cotton clothing wasn't allowed because of the cotton market's reliance on the labor of enslaved people. In theory, Fruitlands sounded ideal. In practice, it was difficult, and the Fruitlands experiment ended after only 7 months. Alcott often struggled financially, and for many years the family was supported by daughter Louisa May Alcott. She submitted stories to journals, and when her book, Little Women, became a huge success, she was able to provide her family with a great deal of security. In his later years, Alcott found some success on the lecture circuit and published some books. He had spent a great deal of his life living in Concord, where he was often in the company of people like Emerson and Thoreau. Alcott's most famous publication is a collection of essays called Concord Days. This week, you'll be reading some excerpts from Concord Days, and you'll get a feel for life among the Transcendentalists and a look at life through Alcott's eyes. Okay, now let's move on and talk about Margaret Fuller. Margaret Fuller was born in Massachusetts in 1810. Because her father believed that his daughter should be given the same educational opportunity as his son, Margaret Fuller received a very good education. For a while, she became a teacher at Alcott's Temple School, but Fuller liked to write, and she had a lot to say. At Emerson's request, she became editor of The Dial, a magazine for Transcendentalists. During that time, she also established a series of meetings called Conversations. During these conversations, women gathered and Fuller encouraged them to think and talk about the things they'd like to do, the forces that held them back, and their positions on issues in the country and the world. In 1844, Fuller moved to New York to become the editor of the New York Tribune, a progressive publication founded by Horace Greeley. There, she found a larger readership, and she didn't shy away from speaking her mind. She wrote critiques about everything from books and music to social policies and political issues. And then in 1845, she published her groundbreaking and influential book, Woman in the 19th Century. In it, she dared to challenge society's traditional gender roles. She asked why we lived by social constructs that limited women's abilities to grow intellectually, to own property, and to influence government. She advocated for young women to seek the same educational and professional opportunities as men, rather than settling for domestic life. Of course, a lot of people reacted unfavorably to the book, and there was a huge uproar. But guess what? The first edition of Women in the 19th Century sold out in a week's time. Fuller had started a conversation that would continue to grow and would eventually lead to change. Unfortunately, Fuller didn't get to witness all these changes. After working in Europe as America's first female foreign war correspondent, she was headed home to America with her Italian husband and young son. There was a shipwreck off the coast of New York, and all three of them perished. However, the women's rights movement continued to grow. It spread across the nation, and although it faced obstacle after obstacle, the women and men involved continued to press on. By starting the dialogue, Margaret Fuller planted seeds that eventually produced change. This week, you're going to read the thoughts and ideas of two transcendentalists who were trailblazers for social change, and you'll be asked to reflect on your readings and articulate some of your own positions and observations. Before you get started, let's review the week's agenda. Of course, you have 5 days of PDF readings and activities that you'll get started on today. Each day, that will be followed by some online practice and an online assessment on day 5. Also on day 5, you'll answer some reflection questions, refresh your writing practice, and write a personal reflection essay in which you'll be reflecting on your learning process throughout this unit. You'll begin with an introductory paragraph that states the topic and its overall effect on you. The body of the paper will discuss your learning experience, any new information you encountered, fresh insights you've gained, and how your perspective may have changed. And you'll end with a review of your main points and an opinion about this material and its effect on you. This week, you'll read about the ideas and positions of Alcott and Fuller, but you'll also be asked to reflect on the material and express your own opinions. It's the kind of thing Alcott might have assigned at his Temple School, and I'm sure Margaret Fuller would also approve. All right, it's time to return to the 19th century so you can learn, think, evaluate, and maybe even blaze a new trail. Hey!